The galaxy didn't ban alien women from living near human men because humans were dangerous. They banned it because too many women never wanted to leave. The transmission flickered across every major network in the Orion sector before being erased exactly 43 seconds later, but by then, millions had already seen it. In the dim blue glow of her apartment overlooking the floating towers of Celestia Prime, Dr. Lyra Vale stared at the frozen frame on her holoscreen while rain hissed softly against the curved glass walls behind her. The room smelled faintly of sterilized metal and cooling circuitry, the familiar scent of long nights spent analyzing sociological patterns no one else wanted to touch. Outside, streams of air traffic painted silver lines through the storm clouds like veins of light across a dark ocean. Lyra folded her slender blue fingers together beneath her chin as data scrolled endlessly across the transparent display hovering above her desk. Pair bond migration reports, emotional dependency statistics, cross-species habitation requests, human compatibility indexes. None of it made sense. According to centuries of galactic evolutionary science, human males should have ranked near the bottom of desirable interspecies partners. They lacked physical dominance compared to the larger warrior races. Their lifespans were shorter. Their pheromone output was weak. Their social hierarchy systems were chaotic and emotionally inconsistent. And yet alien women across multiple systems kept choosing them. Quietly at first, then openly. The Senate called it a sociological instability event. The media called it human attachment syndrome. Lyra called it impossible. A soft chime echoed through her apartment. Dr. Vale, the synthetic voice of her assistant drone said, "Your transport departs in 30 minutes." Lyra exhaled slowly and stood from her desk. Her silver-white hair slid over her shoulder like liquid light as she crossed the room toward the wardrobe terminal. The mirror activated automatically, reflecting the familiar image she had spent years perfecting for academic circles. Composed posture, controlled expression, elegant navy uniform. Trimmed with silver insignia. Rational. Untouchable. Immune to emotional bias. Exactly the kind of woman the Senate trusted to investigate humans objectively. She fastened the collar around her throat and glanced once more at the suspended reports hovering above her desk. One statistic remained highlighted in crimson. 87% of alien females who voluntarily cohabitated with human males reported elevated emotional security levels within 6 months. Emotional security. Not attraction. Not reproductive compatibility. Security. Lyra hated that word. It was vague, unscientific, primitive, and somehow, it kept appearing in every report connected to humans. Another message flashed across her screen, this one classified. Project Hearth Initiative. Location, Earth Arctic Research Station. Primary human contact, Ethan Cole. The attached image materialized beside the text. Lyra studied the human male carefully. Early 30s. Broad shoulders hidden beneath a weatherproof jacket. Blonde hair slightly overgrown. Light stubble along the jawline. Tired green eyes. Completely average by galactic standards. She frowned faintly. This was the man linked to 3 separate interspecies attachment incidents over the last 4 years. 2 scientists had resigned their posts to remain on Earth permanently after working with him. Another requested species transfer residency status after only 8 months stationed nearby. No disciplinary violations. No manipulation indicators. No chemical interference. Just prolonged exposure. Ridiculous, Lyra murmured softly. The shuttle platform outside her building trembled beneath distant thunder as she stepped into the cold night air. Rain kissed her skin in icy droplets while transport engines hummed overhead. Somewhere beyond those clouds, beyond the glowing cities and Senate chambers and endless streams of controlled civilization, was Earth. A world humans still called home despite everything. Lyra entered the shuttle and fastened herself into the acceleration harness as the cabin lights dimmed around her. Across the aisle, 2 passengers whispered quietly while scrolling through entertainment feeds on their tablets. One of them glanced at a human couple seated near the rear of the cabin and lowered her voice even further. "I heard they make you feel understood," she whispered nervously. Her companion laughed softly. "Humans? No." The woman replied while watching the couple smile at each other in silence. "Safe." Lyra turned toward the rain-streaked window before either of them noticed her listening. Outside, the city lights blurred into rivers of gold as the shuttle lifted into the storm-dark sky, and for the first time in years, Dr. Lyra Vale felt something she could not logically explain. Curiosity. The descent toward Earth felt strangely quiet. Lyra sat motionless beside the shuttle window while frost slowly crept along the edges of the glass like silver veins. Beneath the clouds, endless white terrain stretched across the northern hemisphere in frozen silence. Mountains cut through the landscape like dark scars beneath the moonlight, and scattered research facilities glowed faintly against the snowfields, isolated pockets of warmth in a world that looked almost untouched by civilization. The shuttle engines groaned softly during atmospheric entry, their vibration humming through the cabin floor beneath her boots. Across from her, a human child slept against her mother's shoulder while soft instrumental music drifted quietly from the overhead speakers. Lyra noticed something unusual immediately. The humans on board spoke less than most galactic species. There was no constant status competition, no ritualized displays of superiority, just small gestures. A blanket adjusted over sleeping shoulders, a hand resting gently against another hand, someone offering coffee to a stranger without expectation of repayment. Tiny acts, meaningless on paper, yet somehow difficult to ignore in person. Approaching Arctic Research Outpost 7, the pilot announced. Surface temperature is -12 degrees Fahrenheit, with sustained winds at 30 miles per hour. The shuttle landed with a heavy metallic thud against the frozen docking platform. Cold air flooded the cabin the moment the hatch opened, carrying the sharp scent of snow, machine oil, and distant pine forests buried beneath. Layers of ice. Lyra stepped onto the platform and immediately understood why humans described cold as something alive. The wind clawed through her uniform and wrapped around her skin like invisible fingers. Dock workers in thick thermal gear moved through the storm with practiced efficiency, while cargo drones hovered overhead carrying crates of equipment through the swirling snow. The entire station looked worn but functional. Metal walls layered with frost. Flickering amber floodlights. Steam hissing from exposed vents into the darkness. Nothing elegant. Nothing impressive. Yet everything worked. Dr. Lyra Vale? A voice called from nearby. She turned toward the sound. The man approaching her was taller than she expected. Around 6'2", broad-shouldered beneath a dark insulated jacket dusted with snow. Blonde hair pushed back carelessly beneath a wool cap. Green eyes slightly tired but steady. Ethan Cole. He carried no visible status markings. No academic insignia. No ceremonial posture. Just a weather tablet tucked under one arm and a steaming cup balanced carefully in his gloved hand. "Your shuttle landed 20 minutes early," he said calmly as he stopped beside her. His voice was deeper than most alien males she had studied. Rough around the edges. Comfortable. That usually does not happen out here. Lyra straightened slightly. "Dr. Ethan Cole?" "Just Ethan is fine." Snow gathered along his shoulders while he studied her expression briefly. Not her body. Not her status badge. Her face. As if he was checking whether she was tired. The realization irritated her for reasons she could not explain. "You came personally to receive me?" she asked. Ethan glanced toward the worsening storm beyond the landing lights. "Weather gets ugly fast this far north. Did not want you walking alone your first night here." He extended the steaming cup toward her. "Coffee. You look frozen." Lyra stared at the cup cautiously. "You prepared a human stimulant beverage before confirming my species could metabolize it safely?" For half a second, Ethan looked genuinely alarmed. "Right. Sorry. That was stupid." He immediately lowered the cup. "The kitchen has 14 non-human dietary options. I should have asked first." Then something unexpected happened. He looked embarrassed. Not defensive. Not irritated. Embarrassed because he thought he had inconvenienced her. Lyra blinked slowly. Most high-status males she encountered would have argued to preserve social dominance. Ethan simply adjusted. "My species can tolerate moderate caffeine," she admitted quietly. Ethan relaxed almost instantly and handed her the cup carefully. The warmth spread through her gloved hands the moment she accepted it. Real coffee. Strong. Bitter. Fresh. Steam curled upward between them while snow drifted sideways across the platform in silver waves. "You were studying human behavioral attraction patterns, right?" Ethan asked while leading her toward the station entrance. Lyra narrowed her eyes slightly. "The Senate disclosed that information?" "No." He opened the heavy station door, and warm air rolled over them in a wave smelling faintly of cedarwood and engine grease. "But people usually only come this far north for 3 reasons. Climate research, running away from something, or trying to understand humans." Lyra stepped inside beside him as the storm howled against the metal walls outside. "And which one do you think I am?" Ethan gave a small, tired smile, while snow melted slowly into his hair beneath the station lights. Honestly, he took her luggage without asking and started walking down the narrow corridor. I think you have not decided yet. The station settled into silence after midnight. Beyond the reinforced windows, snow moved endlessly across the frozen landscape in pale waves beneath the moonlight, while Arctic winds rattled the outer support beams with low metallic groans. Inside Research Outpost 7, the air carried the comforting smell of recycled heat, brewed coffee, and old electronics that had been repaired too many times to count. Lyra sat alone in the observation corridor with a data tablet balanced across her lap, the blue glow reflecting softly across her violet skin as she reviewed the station personnel logs for the third time. None of it aligned with Senate assumptions. Human males were supposedly territorial and socially unstable under prolonged isolation conditions. Yet the reports surrounding Ethan Cole described something entirely different. Cooperative behavior, emotional regulation, elevated trust ratings among non-human staff. Even more unusual, turnover rates among alien researchers assigned to this station were dramatically lower than the galactic average. A burst of laughter echoed faintly from the lower maintenance deck. Lyra looked up from her tablet toward the railing overlooking the central operations floor below. Ethan stood beside an open heating unit with two engineering technicians, one human and one Veroan female, with bronze skin and four slender arms. The heating system had apparently failed again. Sparks flickered briefly from inside the exposed machinery, while cold air spilled into the corridor in visible streams. I told you the relay coil was dying, the Veroan engineer muttered while adjusting a diagnostic scanner. Ethan crouched beside the damaged panel with a wrench in one hand and a flashlight balanced between his shoulder and neck. Yeah, he replied calmly. And I told you the station budget was held together with duct tape and prayer. The Veroan female laughed unexpectedly. Not polite laughter. Real laughter. Lyra frowned slightly. Most species maintained strict professional distance within mixed research environments, especially around humans. Yet nobody around Ethan seemed guarded. One of the younger staff members walked past carrying supply crates nearly half his size. Ethan noticed immediately. Hey, Tyler, he called without looking up from the repair panel. Put those down before you throw your back out. I am fine, the young technician insisted. Ethan pointed casually toward the cart behind him. Human advice. If you can avoid future spinal problems, you avoid future spinal problems. The technician rolled his eyes, but used the cart anyway. Lyra watched the exchange carefully. No authority display. No dominance ritual. Just concern delivered so casually it barely registered as unusual. That was the problem with humans, she realized. Their behavior often appeared too small to matter. Individually meaningless. Collectively overwhelming. Ethan tightened the final bolt inside the heating unit, and warm air immediately surged back through the vents. The maintenance crew cheered softly. Ethan only smiled and wiped grease from his hands with a rag already stained from previous repairs. You are aware, Lyra said suddenly from the upper corridor, that repairing infrastructure systems personally is considered socially inappropriate for senior researchers in most advanced civilizations. Three heads turned upward toward her. Ethan leaned casually against the repaired unit beneath the harsh overhead lights. That's so. Delegation preserves social hierarchy stability. Ethan considered that for a second. Sounds exhausting. The Veroan engineer snorted quietly into her coffee cup. Lyra descended the staircase, slowly while the others returned to work. Up close, Ethan looked colder than before. Tiny crystals of melted snow still clung to the shoulders of his jacket despite the station heat. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes too, the kind people carried after years of poor sleep and long winters. You should be resting, Lyra observed. Ethan shrugged lightly. Heating dies out here, people stop sleeping. Then morale drops. Then everyone gets weird. Weird, you know? Existential. Another strange human phrase. Lyra folded her arms carefully. You seem unusually attentive to the emotional state of your staff. Ethan blinked once, clearly confused by the observation. They are people. Most station supervisors prioritize operational efficiency first. Operational efficiency is people. He said it so simply that for a moment Lyra did not know how to respond. Ethan grabbed 2 fresh coffee packets from a nearby storage shelf and handed one to her automatically before taking the other for himself. Again, no hesitation, no calculation. As if caring for others was not a decision humans consciously made, but a reflex embedded somewhere deep beneath logic. Lyra accepted the packet slowly. You do this often, she said quietly. Do what? Take care of everyone around you. Ethan opened his coffee and glanced toward the frost-covered windows where the storm continued swallowing the horizon outside. Honestly, he said softly, out here we kind of have to. Then he smiled again. Small, tired, warm enough to make the freezing station suddenly feel less cold. 3 days into her assignment, Lyra stopped trusting her own observations. The problem was not Ethan Cole himself. It was what happened to people around him. The station cafeteria smelled like toasted bread, hot broth, and recycled air warmed by overworked vents while snow hammered softly against the reinforced windows outside. Dim yellow lighting reflected across metal tables scratched by years of use, giving the room the tired comfort of a place built for survival instead of beauty. Lyra sat alone near the observation glass with her tablet opened beside a cooling cup of tea while station personnel drifted in and out around her in thick thermal layers. She had intended to continue her behavioral analysis in silence. Instead, she found herself watching Ethan again. He moved through the cafeteria carrying a maintenance crate tucked beneath one arm while greeting nearly everyone by name. Not rank, not department designation. Names. Morning, May. How is your wrist feeling, Darren? You finally get that scanner calibrated? Tiny interactions. Forgettable individually. Yet every response around him softened almost immediately. Shoulders relaxed. Voices lowered. Tension dissolved. It was subtle enough to escape most observers. Lyra was trained to notice subtle things. Ethan stopped near one of the back tables where a nervous young alien intern struggled with a malfunctioning food dispenser. The machine sputtered loudly before spraying soup across the front of the poor girl's gray uniform. Several nearby researchers glanced over briefly before returning to their meals. The intern froze in visible embarrassment, her silver eyes darting anxiously across the room. Ethan walked over without hesitation. That machine hates everybody equally, he said calmly while grabbing napkins from a nearby counter. The girl looked horrified. I am so sorry. I did not realize the pressure valve was, hey. Ethan handed her the napkins gently. It is soup, not a chemical spill. A few people nearby laughed softly. Not at her. With her. The tension vanished almost instantly. Ethan crouched beside the broken dispenser and smacked the side panel twice with the heel of his palm. The machine hummed back to life. There, he said, terrified it into cooperation. The intern actually smiled. Lyra frowned faintly down at her tablet. Human males were not supposed to reduce social anxiety in other species. Historically, humans created discomfort responses among galactic populations due to their direct eye contact, emotional unpredictability, and physical expressiveness. Yet Ethan consistently produced the opposite effect. Even more concerning, female personnel gravitated toward him unconsciously. A Ceruan biologist touched his shoulder while laughing at something he said. A Veroan engineer brought him extra coffee without being asked. One of the medical staff adjusted the collar of his jacket while passing by, an intimate gesture in several cultures, yet Ethan barely seemed aware of it. He accepted kindness the same way he gave it. Naturally, without suspicion. You are staring again, said a voice beside her. Lyra looked up sharply. Dr. Celine Maris stood there holding a tray with 2 steaming bowls balanced carefully in her hands. Human, mid-40s, warm brown eyes, chief medical officer. Lyra had spoken with her only twice since arriving. I am conducting observational analysis, Lyra replied evenly. Celine smiled faintly as she sat across from her. Sure you are. Lyra ignored the comment. The behavioral shifts around him are statistically unusual. Around Ethan? Celine glanced across the cafeteria where Ethan now helped an exhausted technician carry supplies toward the lower corridor. No, that part is pretty normal. Normal. People breathe easier around him. Celine stirred her soup slowly. Hard to explain unless you spend enough time here. Lyra tilted her head slightly. You speak as though humans possess some kind of emotional field effect. No, Celine looked toward Ethan again while snow drifted beyond the windows like pale ghosts across the frozen dark. Most humans are messy as hell. A quiet laugh escaped her. But Ethan? He notices when people are tired before they admit it. Themselves. Remembers birthdays nobody told him about. Makes coffee for the overnight cruise. Fixes heaters before anyone asks. She shrugged lightly. You spend enough years around someone like that, and eventually your nervous system stops expecting loneliness. The sentence landed harder than Lyra expected. Across the cafeteria, Ethan looked up briefly and caught her watching him again. Instead of appearing uncomfortable, He simply lifted the extra coffee he carried in silent offering. A small gesture. Casual. Familiar already. Something warm moved unexpectedly through Lyra's chest before she quickly looked away toward the storm outside. That frightened her more than anything she had discovered so far. The storm arrived just after midnight. One moment the station sat beneath quiet snowfall and pale moonlight, and the next the entire Arctic horizon disappeared behind walls of white moving faster than the eye could follow. Warning alarms echoed softly through the corridors while external shutters sealed automatically over the observation windows with heavy metallic clangs. Wind slammed against the outer structure hard enough to make the support beams groan deep inside the walls. Lyra stood in the central operations room, watching radar interference ripple across the holographic displays, while emergency lighting painted the station in dim amber shadows. Pressure drop on the western thermal grid, one technician called out. Communications relay losing signal integrity, another added. Ethan moved through the chaos with surprising calm, one gloved hand resting against the central console while he coordinated repairs across 3 different decks at once. He did not raise his voice. He did not panic. Somehow that steadied everyone else more effectively than authority ever could. Seal Corridor 12, he instructed quietly. Reroute auxiliary power to life support before the secondary lines freeze. A burst of static crackled overhead. Then the station lights died completely. Darkness swallowed the room. For half a second the only sound was the storm screaming outside the walls. Then backup generators hummed weakly to life, restoring faint red emergency lights along the floor panels. Someone cursed softly nearby. Main grid is gone, a technician muttered. We lost external heat circulation. Ethan grabbed a flashlight from the console immediately. How long before the lower pipes freeze? Maybe 30 minutes. Less if the wind keeps climbing. Ethan nodded once. Calm. Focused. All right. Everybody move to thermal shelters on levels 2 and 3. Stay together. Lyra watched the room react instantly to his voice. Not because he outranked them. Because they trusted him. That distinction mattered more than she wanted to admit. Ethan turned toward her while pulling on a heavy insulated coat from the emergency locker. Dr. Vale, stay inside the central wing until we stabilize the outer lines. Lyra frowned. You are going outside. Western valve controls froze shut. He slung a repair kit over one shoulder. If the pipes burst, the station loses heat completely. Then send maintenance drones. Storm interference fried half of them already. Ethan checked the flashlight battery with practiced efficiency. I will be back in 10 minutes. The outer airlock hissed open before Lyra could answer. A wave of freezing air blasted into the corridor, carrying snow crystals sharp enough to sting exposed skin. Ethan disappeared into the white darkness almost immediately. The door sealed behind him with a heavy metallic thud. 10 minutes became 20, then 30. The station temperature dropped another 6 degrees. Frost crept slowly across the inner windows while nervous conversations filled the shelter corridors in low, anxious murmurs. Lyra sat beside the emergency heater in silence, unable to focus on the data tablet resting untouched in her lap. Her pulse felt wrong, faster than normal, irritated, unstable. She told herself it was environmental stress. Then the outer hatch alarm sounded again. Ethan stumbled through the airlock covered in snow from head to boots, while cold vapor rolled around him in thick clouds. His cheeks were flushed red from the wind, and tiny ice crystals clung to his eyelashes beneath the harsh corridor lights. Valve is clear, he said breathlessly while pulling off his gloves. Heat should stabilize in a minute. Relief swept visibly through the nearby staff. One technician actually hugged him before realizing what she was doing. Ethan only laughed softly despite shivering hard enough for his teeth to chatter. Easy, he murmured. I'm not dead. The station heating vents rumbled back to life seconds later. Warm air slowly spread through the corridors. People cheered quietly. Someone handed Ethan coffee. Another draped a blanket over his shoulders. Lyra stood frozen near the heater watching all of it happen. No ceremony. No transaction. Just instinctive care flowing back toward the person who constantly gave it away. Ethan noticed her staring again and walked over slowly. Exhaustion visible now beneath the fading adrenaline. You okay? He asked. Lyra blinked once. You risked severe cold exposure for infrastructure systems. For people, he corrected gently. The systems just keep them alive. The heater beside them crackled softly while red emergency lights flickered across the corridor walls. Ethan rubbed warmth back into his hands and gave her a tired smile that somehow looked more genuine than anything she had seen inside Senate chambers. Humans really are confusing, huh? He asked quietly. Lyra looked at the snow melting from his hair onto the station floor, at the exhaustion in his eyes, at the way everyone around him unconsciously moved closer now that he had returned safely. Then she realized something deeply unsettling. For the first time since arriving on Earth, she had been afraid for someone other than herself. The storm finally weakened sometime near dawn. By morning, the Arctic sky outside the station windows had turned pale gray beneath slow drifting snow, and weak sunlight spilled across the frozen landscape in cold silver bands. Inside Research Outpost 7, exhaustion hung over the corridors like fog. Staff moved slower. Conversations stayed quiet. Coffee consumption doubled. Ethan had apparently slept less than 2 hours. Lyra discovered this while passing the lower operations deck shortly after breakfast. He sat alone beside the main communications console with a half-finished mug of coffee cooling beside his elbow while maintenance. Reports scrolled across 3 separate monitors at once. The soft blue glow from the screens reflected across his tired face, sharpening the faint lines beneath his eyes. He looked human in the most fragile sense of the word. Not heroic, not untouchable, just worn down by responsibility and still refusing to stop carrying it. You should be recovering, Lyra said as she approached. Ethan looked up from the monitors and blinked slowly, as if returning from somewhere far away. Good morning to you too. Lack of sleep negatively impacts cognitive performance. That sounds exactly like something a scientist would say before drinking her 3rd cup of caffeine. Lyra glanced toward the empty coffee containers beside him. 4th. Ethan smiled faintly. See? You are adapting already. She ignored the comment and studied the data on his screens instead. Thermal recovery charts, resource allocations, personnel wellness updates. One particular file caught her attention. Emotional fatigue assessments. You monitor psychological stress levels manually? She asked. Ethan shrugged lightly while rubbing his eyes. Out here isolation hits people hard. You are not a therapist. No, but I have buried enough coworkers to know loneliness becomes physical after a while. The sentence landed heavily between them. Ethan seemed to realize what he had said a second later and looked away toward the frost-covered windows. Sorry, he murmured quietly. That came out darker than I meant. Lyra remained silent for a moment. Galactic reports often described humans as emotionally unstable because they expressed vulnerability too openly. Sitting here beside Ethan now, she began wondering if the opposite was true. Maybe humans survive precisely because they refuse to hide pain from each other completely. A soft chime interrupted the silence. Incoming transmission request. Senate Priority Channel. Lyra stiffened immediately as the holographic communication screen activated above the console. Counselor Varen appeared in shimmering blue light, her severe expression framed by the towering marble architecture of the Galactic Senate chambers behind her. Dr. Vale, the counselor said, sharply, your preliminary findings are overdue. Ethan immediately stood. I can leave if you need privacy. Stay, Lyra said before she could stop herself. Both humans blinked slightly at the speed of her response. The counselor noticed too. Her expression narrowed almost imperceptibly. Very well, Varen continued. Have you identified the source of the attachment phenomenon? Lyra straightened carefully. The situation is more complex than initial reports suggested. Explain. Lyra glanced briefly toward Ethan beside the console. He quietly pretended not to listen while reorganizing supply inventories, though she noticed his shoulders tense slightly. Humans appear to generate unusually high long-term emotional trust responses in mixed-species environments, she said slowly, particularly among female populations. Due to biological influence? No confirmed pheromonal mechanism. Then what? Lyra hesitated. That frightened her most of all. She still did not fully understand the answer herself. Behavioral consistency, she admitted quietly. Protective social bonding patterns. Emotional attentiveness. The counselor looked visibly unimpressed. Those are primitive mammalian traits. Ethan snorted softly under his breath without looking up from the inventory scanner. Varen's sharp eyes shifted toward him immediately. You find this amusing, human? Ethan finally looked at the hologram. Calm. Tired. Entirely unthreatened by Senate authority. No, ma'am, he replied politely. Just sounds weird hearing kindness described like a contagious disease. Silence filled the operations room. Lyra stared at him in disbelief. No alien would speak to a counselor so casually. Yet Ethan showed no hostility in his tone at all, only honest confusion. Varen's expression hardened. Dr. Vale, she said coldly, maintain professional distance. Emotional contamination remains a recognized risk factor during prolonged human exposure. The transmission ended seconds later. The hologram vanished. Quiet returned to the room except for the low hum of station machinery. Ethan leaned back against the console and sighed softly. I think your boss hates us. Lyra looked at him. Carefully. You were not offended. Nah. He took another sip of cold coffee and grimaced immediately. People fear what they do not understand. He paused briefly before adding in a quieter voice, humans included. Snow drifted slowly beyond the windows while pale morning light filled the station around them. For reasons Lyra could no longer logically defend, the room felt calmer simply because Ethan was still standing there. The leak began 12 hours later. Lyra first noticed it during the evening meal when every holoscreen inside the cafeteria suddenly switched to emergency network broadcasts without warning. Conversations died instantly. Utensils lowered. Even the heating vents seemed quieter beneath the sudden tension filling the room. A crimson Senate insignia rotated slowly above the main screen, while bold letters scrolled across the bottom of the feed. Human attachment reports classified as civilization-level concern. Lyra felt her stomach tighten before the report even started. Around her, station personnel exchanged uneasy glances while snow drifted silently beyond the dark windows outside. Then the images appeared. Private Senate documents. Statistical charts. Migration records. Pair bond satisfaction indexes between human males and non-human females across 32 systems. Someone had leaked everything. Following multiple unauthorized interspecies attachment incidents, the broadcaster announced calmly, the Galactic Senate is considering residential restrictions involving prolonged civilian proximity between human males and vulnerable non-human populations. A stunned silence spread across the cafeteria. Ethan looked up slowly from his coffee beside the far table, confusion written plainly across his face. Vulnerable populations? He muttered quietly. What the hell does that mean? More reports flooded the screen. Alien women resigning high-ranking positions to remain on Earth colonies. Increased psychological resistance to traditional social hierarchies after prolonged human exposure. Dramatic declines in emotional stress markers among females living alongside humans. The language of the report grew colder with every sentence. Destabilizing emotional dependency. Behavioral contamination risk. Long-term species integration concerns. Lyra barely heard the rest. Her confidential research data sat displayed across half the galaxy without context or nuance, twisted into something dangerous. Across the cafeteria, several alien staff members shifted uncomfortably beneath the growing attention directed toward them. One younger in turn lowered her eyes immediately when nearby technicians glanced her way. Another quietly left the room altogether. Ethan stood slowly from his chair. This is insane, he said under his breath. Nobody answered him. The screen changed again. A panel discussion appeared featuring Senate sociologists debating possible explanations for the phenomenon. Human males demonstrate unusually persistent emotional reinforcement patterns, one analyst explained. Unlike most advanced species, humans maintain pair bond behaviors even outside reproductive cycles. Additionally, another expert added, human social conditioning prioritizes emotional reassurance and protective validation at statistically abnormal rates. Ethan looked genuinely uncomfortable now. They're talking about basic kindness like it is narcotics. Because for some species, Lyra said quietly beside him, it effectively functions that way. Ethan turned toward her sharply. The cafeteria lights reflected faintly in his tired green eyes, while the Senate broadcast continued behind them. You believe that? Lyra opened her mouth to answer and realized she no longer knew. That frightened her more than the leak itself. The broadcast shifted one final time. A classified image appeared briefly on screen before Senate censors attempted to blur it. Too late. The entire station saw it clearly. Ethan, a photograph taken months earlier during a station gathering. He stood surrounded by researchers from 6 different species while laughing at something outside the camera frame. Every woman near him looked relaxed in a way almost impossible to fake. Not infatuated. Safe. The image vanished immediately, but the damage remained. The cafeteria fell into heavy silence. Ethan stared at the dark screen for several long seconds, before rubbing a hand across the back of his neck awkwardly. Well, he said softly, that is probably not great. A few nervous laughs escaped nearby tables despite the tension. Even now, somehow, he was trying to make everyone less afraid. Lyra watched him carefully while cold realization settled deep inside her chest. The Senate believed humans were dangerous because alien women desired them. That was not the truth. The truth was far worse for galactic power structures. Alien women trusted them enough to relax, to speak honestly, to stop performing perfection every second of their lives. Across the room, Ethan noticed one of the younger alien interns trembling slightly while staring at the Senate warnings still scrolling silently across the bottom of the screen. Without hesitation, he walked over and sat beside her. No speech, no grand gesture, just quiet presence. The girl visibly steadied within seconds. Lyra felt something inside her shift again as she watched the scene unfold beneath the dim cafeteria lights. Not attraction, not curiosity, understanding. And for the first time since arriving on Earth, she finally understood why the galaxy was afraid of humans. Because people who felt safe together became very difficult to control. The station felt different after the leak. Quieter, careful. People still smiled at Ethan in the hallways, still accepted coffee from his hands, still gathered near him during long shifts without seeming aware they were doing it. But now there was hesitation underneath every interaction. Like everyone suddenly realized they were being watched by an entire galaxy. Lyra noticed it most during the night rotations. Research Outpost 7 operated on 20-hour schedules during the Arctic winter, and by 2 in the morning the station corridors usually settled into a soft mechanical silence broken only by distant ventilation fans and the occasional hiss of opening doors. Tonight the silence felt heavier. Snow drifted endlessly beyond the reinforced windows, while pale blue emergency lights glowed faintly along the empty hallways. Lyra sat alone in the upper observation deck with her report interface open in front of her. She had rewritten the same sentence 14 times already. Human emotional bonding patterns may represent a social adaptation response. Delete. Human males demonstrate unusual interpersonal stability. Delete again. None of the language felt honest anymore. The truth sounded too simple to survive inside Senate chambers. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Ethan stepped into the observation deck, carrying 2 steaming mugs. He wore a gray thermal shirt beneath an unzipped station jacket, the sleeves pushed halfway up his forearms, as if he had stopped caring about appearances hours ago. "You skipped dinner," he said quietly while placing one mug beside her terminal. Again, Lyra glanced at the drink cautiously. Tea. No caffeine this time. He sat across from her, near the observation glass, while snow reflected silver light across the room around them. For several minutes neither of them spoke. The station hummed softly beneath their feet. Somewhere far below, a maintenance drone rolled through the lower corridors with a faint mechanical whir. Ethan stared out at the frozen horizon while rubbing tired fingers against the warmth of his mug. "You know," he said eventually, "when I first started working with non-human crews, everybody warned me not to get attached." Lyra looked up slowly. "Why?" Ethan gave a quiet laugh, without humor. "Humans have a reputation too." He leaned back slightly in his chair. "We are emotional. Reckless. Too intense. Most people assumed mixed crews would never work long-term. And yet they did." "Yeah." He smiled faintly toward the snow outside. "Turns out people mostly just want to feel like somebody is glad they exist." The sentence settled into the silence between them. Lyra stared down at her untouched tea while something inside her chest tightened unexpectedly. On Celestia Prime, nobody spoke like this. Affection was implied through status agreements, resource sharing, genetic planning. Controlled. Efficient. Safe. Humans said things out loud. Dangerous things. Honest things. Ethan noticed her expression immediately. "Sorry," he murmured. "I do that sometimes." "Do what?" "Accidentally sound philosophical at 2 in the morning." To her own surprise, Lyra laughed softly. The sound startled both of them. Ethan blinked once before smiling back at her, and suddenly the observation deck felt warmer than the rest of the station despite the frozen world outside. "There it is," he said quietly. "What?" "You smiling." Lyra looked away immediately toward the storm-dark horizon. "That was not intentional. Best kind usually is." Silence returned again, softer this time. Ethan sipped his coffee while distant Arctic winds brushed against the reinforced glass in low hollow waves. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a while. Lyra hesitated before nodding once. Ethan studied the steam rising from his mug rather than looking directly at her. "Why does the Senate care so much about this?" he asked quietly. About humans and alien women. Lyra opened her mouth automatically, prepared to repeat official doctrine about social destabilization and cross-species attachment risks. Instead, she heard herself say something else entirely. Because emotionally secure people become difficult to manipulate. Ethan looked at her then. Really looked at her. No teasing. No casual humor. Just quiet understanding settling between them beneath the pale station lights. That sounds lonely, he said softly. Lyra felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. No one in the Senate had ever responded to vulnerability that way. No analysis. No correction. Just concern. Ethan leaned forward slowly and rested one hand lightly against the table between them. Not touching her. Just close enough to remind her she was not alone in the room. Lyra, he said carefully. When was the last time somebody cared how you felt without wanting something from you afterward? The question hit harder than any Senate interrogation ever had. Outside, snow continued falling across the endless Arctic dark while inside the observation deck. For the first time in years, Lyra could not think of a single answer. The transport shuttle arrived 3 days later beneath a sky filled with pale winter light. From the observation deck, Lyra watched its engines cut through the Arctic clouds in long streams of white vapor before the craft descended slowly toward the frozen landing platform outside Research Outpost 7. Snow swirled violently around the hull as the landing struts touched down with a heavy metallic thud. Senate retrieval team. Right on schedule. The station corridors felt strangely quiet that morning. Nobody said much during breakfast. Nobody asked whether Lyra intended to leave. They already knew. Ethan especially. He stood near the docking bay entrance with his hands buried deep inside his jacket pockets while technicians unloaded supply crates behind him in silence. Tired green eyes. Slight stubble along his jaw. Hair still messy from another sleepless shift. Completely ordinary by galactic standards. Completely impossible to explain by them. Lyra stopped a few feet away from him while cold air drifted through the opening shuttle doors behind her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The station lights reflected softly across the frost gathering on the floor between them. So, Ethan said quietly, this is where the mysterious alien investigator tells me humans are a galactic menace. Lyra almost smiled. Almost. You are statistically disruptive, she replied softly. Ethan nodded once. Fair. Another silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Just heavy with things neither of them fully knew how to say. Beyond the reinforced windows, endless snow stretched toward the horizon in silver-white waves beneath the pale Arctic sun. Beautiful in the lonely way only frozen places could be. Lyra held the finalized Senate report tightly against her chest tablet. 37 pages of revised conclusions. Every sentence carefully chosen. Every observation painfully honest. Human emotional bonding patterns do not represent a biological threat. Human social behavior creates elevated feelings of safety, stability, and emotional validation among multiple species. Restrictions are not recommended. The Senate would hate it. Which meant it was probably true. Ethan glanced toward the report briefly before looking back at her face instead. You nervous? He asked. Lyra considered lying. Yes. Ethan gave a small, understanding nod. Good sign. How is anxiety a positive indicator? Means something matters to you. He shrugged lightly. Humans get nervous about important stuff all the time. Lyra stared at him for a long moment while station announcements echoed faintly through the corridor overhead. Somewhere deeper inside the facility, someone laughed softly at a joke she could not hear. Life continuing. Warmth continuing. She finally understood why alien women stayed near humans even when logic warned them not to. Humans made ordinary moments feel safe enough to exist inside fully. No performance. No constant competition. Just presence. Ethan noticed her expression shift slightly. What? He asked. Lyra looked toward the falling snow outside before answering. When I arrived here, she said quietly, I believed humans were creating emotional dependency. Ethan leaned casually against the wall beside the docking bay. And now, Lyra met his eyes fully for the first time since the shuttle landed. Now I think the galaxy became dependent on pretending emotional distance with strength. The words hung softly between them. Ethan did not answer immediately. He just looked at her with that same calm attention he gave everyone inside this station, as if listening itself mattered. Then, very gently, he smiled. Not triumphant, not flirtatious, just warm, human. For what it is worth, he said quietly, I am really glad you came here. Something inside Lyra tightened painfully at the sincerity in his voice. No manipulation. No hidden motive. He simply meant it. A boarding signal chimed from the shuttle behind her. Final departure call. Lyra should have moved immediately. Instead, she stood there another few seconds beneath the pale station lights while snow drifted endlessly outside the windows around them. Then, slowly, she reached forward and took Ethan's hand. The gesture startled him only briefly before his fingers closed gently around hers. Warm, steady, real. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. Beyond the glass walls of the Arctic station, the frozen world stretched silent beneath the winter sky, while someone